In September 1983, a violent uprising of Grenadian citizens, stemming from poverty under the People's Revolutionary Government, resulted in the house arrest and elimination of the country's second Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop, and the establishment of the Revolutionary Military Council with Hudson Osman as chairman. The Military Council, now in control of Grenada, placed Governor-General Paul Scoon under house arrest and announced a 4-day total curfew, during which anyone seen on the streets would be eliminated. Following a formal appeal for help from the Organisation of Eastern Caribbean States and the secret support for outside intervention by the Governor-General Paul Scoon, President Reagan agreed to launch military intervention,
a place much closer to our shores, Grenada,
fearing a repeat of the Iran hostage rescue. However, there were also immense fears over Point Salines International Airport, which, though originally constructed to boost tourism, was capable of hosting military aircraft close to the United States. The United States invasion of Grenada, codenamed Operation Urgent Fury, was to officially begin at dawn on the 25th of October 1983. However, there was much work to be done before the formal invasion. SEAL Team 6 was tasked with 3 vital missions as part of the invasion. The first was the reconnaissance of Point Salines Airport prior to it being seized. The second was to capture the vital Radio Free Grenada transmitter in order to stop public broadcasts, and third, to secure and extract Paul Scoon from his residence. This was the first time that SEAL Team 6 in its brief 3-year history would be deployed into combat. The team leader of SEAL Team 6 at the time was Captain Robert Gormley, who had recently taken over from the infamous Dick Marcinko. In order to perform the reconnaissance at Point Salines, prior to the 75th Ranger Battalion seizing the airport, the plan was for 16 operators to arrive off the island's southern coast in 2 C-130s, parachute into the sea, climb aboard their Boston whalers, and meet up with the destroyer Clifton Sprague. There, an additional 6-man SEAL squad complemented with USAF combat controllers would join them after their own sea jump. Finally, they would move to the airfield, check the runway serviceability, remove any obstacles, place homing beacons, and await the Rangers. But disaster struck from the beginning. The Team 6 parachute jump scheduled for dusk was pushed back 6 hours due to delays. The plan was to drop in the daylight if possible. However, due to a mix-up of time zones, it was pitch dark with no moonlight. The already treacherous nighttime jump was made worse by 25-knot winds, well in excess of the recommended 18-knot limit. The 16 jumpers went ahead, in teams of 8, each member carrying a maximum combat load of over 60 pounds, and without the benefit of a dip test to check for buoyancy. Only 5 of the first 8 men surfaced. Further, the C-130 missed its turn point and dropped them 2 miles away, meaning they couldn't find their boat and had to bob in the sea in their life vests until a launch from the Clifton Sprague recovered them. The other 8 men fared little better, losing 1 man but at least finding their boat. After the rendezvous with the Clifton Sprague, they picked up the 6-man SEAL CCT team and set off undermanned for the Point Salines airfield. However, the group had to abort the mission when a Grenadian patrol boat came too close to them. They tried again the following night, but this time their outboard motor died, and they drifted for 11 hours before being picked up again by the destroyer. The Rangers bound for the airport would have no advance information on its defences. As the SEALs were preparing for their assault aboard the destroyer, they were notified that 3 State Department representatives were to accompany them to the Governor's mansion. They were to bring along a radio for the Governor-General to immediately let the world know that the American aid is legal and, more importantly, wanted on the island to help the locals. Captain Gormley flew out to the staging area and gave a final mission briefing and the rules of engagement to the men. They were to shoot only once shot at or threatened, and they were to give Grenadian troops the chance to surrender before firing, to avoid hurting any islanders. The State Department representatives told the team not to expect much from the local Cuban resistance. This would prove not to be the case. SEAL Team 6 took off at 0530 hours on the 25th of October from Barbados. There were only 3 Black Hawks available for missions, 2 were dedicated to the primary target of the Governor's house and the other for the radio station. As the team reached the eastern end of Grenada, daylight had broken and they could see the Marines ensconced at the airfield as they flew down the south side of Grenada. Under the command of Lieutenant Kim Erskine, broke off and headed for their target. As soon as the Governor's house team crossed the mountains, the friendly Grenadians disappeared and they began taking ground fire. The air was filled with anti-aircraft and tracer rounds. As they approached the LZ, the team had to accommodate the State Department reps by having to land the Black Hawks close enough to the ground for them to walk or jump off, as they were untrained for a 90-foot rope rappel to the ground. In order to do so, the Black Hawk carrying the first team dropped a man at the front of the house to clear some trees with a chainsaw for landing. The other Black Hawk had made it to the rear of the mansion and dropped the second team off successfully. As the rear house team secured the immediate perimeter and looked to make entry into the mansion, they were abruptly interrupted by the other Black Hawk at the front taking heavy fire. The Black Hawk had flared to 75 feet, preparing for landing, when light arms fire from Cuban AK-47s started slapping its side. As it tried to manoeuvre into a landing, an RPG from the hillside overlooking the mansion whizzed by, barely missing. During the onslaught, the Black Hawk was pushed horizontally through the air away from the hillside and shuddered leftwards. Inside, the pilot yelled out to the crew, co-pilot was hit, and the helo lurched out of control, starting to fall downhill towards the mansion. As the chopper picked up speed, it almost inverted, but somehow the pilot managed to regain control and keep flying, screaming sideways past the mansion towards the harbour with trees and buildings flashing past. As the team prepared for a crash landing and hoping it would be in the water, they unlaced their boots in anticipation. The co-pilot was bleeding heavily with what was assumed to be a severed femoral artery. Just as the chopper reached a few feet over the water, the pilot managed to level the helicopter, and they hurtled their way out of the bay, still under heavy fire from the hills and now the harbour. The pilot said he wasn't sure how long he could keep them flying for, but that there was a chance they could make it to the USS Guam out at sea, where there was a hospital aboard. After what seemed like an eternity, they spotted the grey shape of the USS Guam through the mist. As they headed in, all the seamen took cover as the wounded bird made its approach with terrible screeching and grinding noises. On review of the helicopter, there were 48 bullet holes, including one through the gearbox. The co-pilot was quickly dragged out of his seat and sent to the operating room. The Brigadier General on the ship sent an immediate request for another chopper to be readied to take the SEALs back to the island to join the others. Back at the Governor's mansion, the entry team at the rear had been busy at work to ensure the rescue of the Governor and his wife. One of the team had eliminated 2 uniformed soldiers who were coming in the gate to the grounds as they looked to make entry. Unsure as to how many Cuban soldiers were inside, the SEALs made multiple entry points to confuse any guards. As the team scoured the halls and downstairs rooms, with persistent gunfire being heard from the surrounding hills and compound perimeter, they found 9 civilians in the basement, along with the Governor and his wife. The civilians had let the team know that there were soldiers upstairs on the landing taking up firing positions. The team leader Duke and his fellow SEALs slowly made their way upstairs to be confronted by 4 Grenadian soldiers with AK-47s pointing at them. However, rather than a clinical SEAL team-esque takedown, the team kept to their instructions of trying to take as little life as possible. With an overpowering and daunting sight in front of them, the Grenadian guards promptly lowered their weapons and surrendered without a shot being fired. Just as they thought they were in the clear, 3 BTR-60 armoured personnel carriers appeared at the front gate of the mansion. The SEALs had enough men to resist a good-sized infantry force, but they didn't have the weapons to deal with the Soviet BTR-60s, so they requested a Spectre gunship overhead. The gunship was modified with 20mm cannons and the 105mm howitzer. The BTR-60s were trying to break through the gate, and not wanting to engage an enemy without overwhelming firepower from air support, Duke's team held their fire. But now inside the gates, the BTRs lumbered towards the house. Just as the SEALs were deliberating on what to do, the booming echo of the AC-130's 20mm cannons rang out as the first BTR's turret swung itself to face the mansion, leaving it totally incapacitated. The next 2 were hit immediately afterwards. Duke brought the gunship's fire to within 20 metres of the mansion's front door. Now with the BTR-60 threat neutralised, they had protected the Governor, his wife and the other civilians. That evening, the Marines who were relieving the SEAL team at the mansion landed on the northeast side of the house and under the cover of darkness carefully made their way to the mansion, arriving just after daybreak. The Governor-General and his wife, along with Duke's SEALs, boarded their escape helicopter and landed at the airfield at 0800 hours that same morning. The team that was instructed to secure the radio station had a different story to tell. 12 SEAL Team 6 operators, under the command of Lieutenant Donald Kim Erskine, flew onto the radio station in a Black Hawk helicopter. The helicopter took small arms fire on the insertion, but managed to land. Once the team landed, it quickly overran the radio station compound and took enemy prisoners. The SEALs were told to hold the station until the Governor and a broadcast team could be brought in. Ironically, after the team took control of the transmitter tower, it was not able to make radio contact with the SEAL command post. The SEALs subsequently set up a defensive perimeter while they continued to try and make radio contact. As this was happening, a truck with armed Grenadian soldiers arrived at the station. The SEALs ordered the soldiers to drop their weapons, and after a brief but tense standoff, the Grenadian soldiers opened fire. After an erratic but powerful firefight, the SEALs held off the Grenadian soldiers, either neutralising or wounding all of them. The SEALs continued to try to make radio contact, but then a BTR-60 and 3 trucks carrying a dozen soldiers each were spotted coming towards the station. The operators flanked the building and the BTR covered the front entrance with its 14.5mm KPV heavy machine gun. The incoming fire on the SEALs' position was becoming devastatingly heavy, and they were running out of ammunition. They were engaged with a numerically superior enemy force. The team realised that their only option was to change their original plan of holding the radio station and instead disable the radio transmitter and extract towards the water. Leaving the bulk of the operators to provide covering defensive fire, 2 of the team headed back to the tower to disable the transmitter. On their return, they started their extract plan. They followed a pre-planned escape route out behind the station and across a broad meadow that led to a path that cut between cliffs and a beach, but the meadow was exposed to Grenadian fire. The team leapfrogged across the exposed ground and took heavy fire from the Grenadians, and several were wounded. Finally reaching the end of the meadow, they cut through a chain-link fence, ran into dense brush and followed the path to the beach. The Grenadians were still in pursuit, so the SEALs waded into the water and began swimming parallel to the shore until they found cliff ledges in which to hide. Once the Grenadians had given up the search, they swam out to sea. They were in the water for nearly 6 hours until a rescue plane spotted them and vectored the USS Caron to pick them up. The officer in charge, Erskine, was wounded in the arm during the operation and was awarded the Purple Heart and Silver Star for heroism and leadership in commanding the assault element. 3 other SEAL Team 6 members were wounded during the operation. After Urgent Fury, SEAL Team 6 had a lot of work to do, debriefing their Navy bosses and the State Department as a priority. There were lots of problems discovered with equipment, personnel and funding that were highlighted in Urgent Fury. Captain Gormley had to brief the Pentagon and the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral James Watkins. Duke was taken along too, as the Admiral was insistent on meeting one of the men who had been responsible for the success. After briefing Admiral Watkins, he was informed that there was urgent help needed to procure essential equipment and to increase the allowance of SEALs and support personnel. The Admiral listened closely and subsequently instructed his staff to get the equipment, people and money needed to support the SEAL Team 6 requirements. The steep and painful issues that this early SEAL Team 6 encountered ultimately created a strong platform for what the East Coast Command developed into, and for the success it went on to become.